Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahana Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavaditamastu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna. So these afternoon classes, we're going to start with the thematic Śrī Īśopaniṣad study, which is basically, it's Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur's Śrī tattva-sutra, which we discussed a little bit last year when we were going through Śrī Īśopaniṣad. Now we'll go through it directly. So just a little bit more of an introduction for this year of the course, because under the G, Dave, would you like?
Oh no, I'm just like listening.
Okay, just listening. Okay. Pandavaji, this morning he talked about the difference between what we did last year and what we did this year and the reason, and I just want to expand on that a little bit, because generally we become eager to study Srimad Bhagavatam, and we have 4 years before we study Bhagavatam in this course. Generally there's just 1 year before you study Bhagavatam. You know, you study Bhakti Shastri and then, okay, now I'm prepared, now I get to the core stuff. And so it may seem strange to have to go through 4 years and frustrating you. And we talked about this a little bit after this morning's class, but it wasn't on the video, so I have to talk a little bit about it. So forgive the repetition. I'll try to say it differently. So 18 years ago, Sahotra Maharaj and Bhakti-yoga Maharaj started the classes for Srimad Bhagavatam. It was over at the boys' school. The boys were also taking the class, so it was their philosophy class portion, but it was also open to others. So we were there, and the idea was, since most of those who were attending were either born in the movement and they understood Bhagavad Gita, the Gurukul boys, or have been around for over a decade, some over 2 decades. We already have the knowledge of Bhakti Shastri. We already know the basic tenets. So therefore, let's just go in and start studying Srimad Bhagavatam, right? And so we did. And so we went for a few years like that. And what we found was that the questions that were being asked, it's an open forum just like this, we go through, and as there are questions, then we answer. We found that the questions that were being asked in general, for the majority of those few years that we were doing Bhagavatam, were what I call Bhagavad Gita level doubts. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing to call it a Bhagavad Gita level doubt. Arjuna had these doubts, for our benefit, of course, that he put forth toward Krishna, and Krishna, of course, was very patient with him, and he listened, and he talked him through these doubts, right? And then, but he brought him to the point of the conclusion of the Bhagavad Gita, which is, what's the conclusion of the Bhagavad Gita? Sarvadharma Pratyajya, surrender unto Krishna, right? Abandon all these other varieties of your different ideas on what it is to have perfection, and just surrender to Krishna, right? So when I call them Bhagavad Gita level doubts, it's not an insult, it's just the level of doubt that is there. So an example of this, because I don't just want to say this and, I want to give an example. Now, normally the example that I give, and I'll give it, but I won't give the complete explanation of it. I'll give a different example. But normally when we talk about this, the example I give, and I'm sure each of you has heard this doubt. Maybe you've even had this doubt on your own. But so either you yourself or someone in your devotional career has come up to you and said, you know what? My chanting is very inattentive. It's even sometimes offensive. I think it's probably better that I don't chant, because when I'm chanting, I'm creating offenses, and then it's causing so many other troubles. Better if I don't chant. Or maybe the doubt is that I'm so busy my whole day. I work, 8 hours a day, but I work 2 hours away. So I have to drive for 2 hours there, 2 hours back, so that takes 10 hours, right? And then when I get home, I have to prepare meals, and then, with all that I have to do just to maintain my family, I don't have time to chant good japa. Like, okay, I could chant while driving, but it's not advised to do that because it's distracted. So it's better that I don't chant any japa at all, right? Everyone's heard these sort of doubts or had them? Okay, no one's disagreeing. Okay, so it's a fairly common thing, right? But we know that Krishna says, always think of me, become my devotee, worship me and offer your homage unto me, thus you'll come to me without fail. And he tells you how to do that. You go through the spiritual master, right? And our spiritual masters have actually not just requested us, but it was part of our vow, those of us who are initiated. We made a promise. Okay, I'm going to chant at least 16 rounds a day, right? So this level of doubt of maybe it's better that I don't chant, or maybe it's better that I just chant one good round. I'll make sure I'm focused and I'll chant one very good round, and then that's better than chanting 16 shnika shnika nam nam. Oh, what's that over there, right? So we have these doubts, and these are Bhagavad Gita level doubts, because we're not convinced actually that we should surrender to Krishna. We're thinking, well, Krishna, wouldn't it be better if I do this? And we're quoting, like Arjuna, he actually was quoting Shastra. He was saying, but if I fight, I'm going to destroy family tradition, right? And then the whole dynasty is going to be spoiled. Is that what you want, Krishna? Right? He was making sense. He was quoting Shastra. But Krishna said, no, although you're speaking learned words, you're grieving for that which is not worthy of grief. Right? You're lamenting for that which is not worthy of grief. So when we have these doubts, maybe it's better if I just, chant one round, one good round, and then, or it's, I shouldn't chant while driving, so I can't chant at all because that's the only time of day that I possibly have. But the thing is, so there's 24 hours a day. Let's say, for example, all of a sudden one day we woke up and there were 28 hours in a day, right? But we only need 2 hours to chant, so that's another even 2 hours. But still, if we had those 28 hours, we would still say, oh, there's not enough time, because, all of a sudden something else very important would come up, right? So this means when we have these doubts, this means that A, we don't have a full understanding of what Shastra is actually requesting us to do. And it also means that we don't have the proper faith. So I'm actually going to give a different example, because this example, I think we've all heard the explanation. Because, of course, if someone's saying, I want to chant one good round instead of 16 bad ones, you say, okay, you chant one good round, and then you chant 15 bad rounds because you promised to chant 16, or, etc. Anyway, we don't have to go through. I'm sure we all have our own responses to this. But there's another circumstance, another scenario. It happened here in Sri Mayapur. I heard these devotees talking. And they were very enthusiastic about Harinam, these devotees. They want to start Harinam, which is a nice service. You go around and you chant the Lord's names, and people become enlivened. It's very good. And then the next time I saw these devotees, who were very enthusiastic, we're going to do this. I said, okay, so how's it going? So it was 2-3 weeks later. How's the Harinam going? Oh, we couldn't start yet because, first we have to get this, the cart, and then we have to get the Gornitai deities, and then we have to get the sound system, right? And then you have to get the lovely dancers up front to attract the crowd. And then you have to have not just the male lead vocal, but you also have to have the female lead vocal, separate microphones. And so it's, you know, it's a full experience. And they were absolutely dead serious, that they thought that there's no way you can do Harinam without all these facilities. Now, of course, these things can add to the experience of the Harinam. Yukta Vairagya, okay, good. But Harinam doesn't depend on these things. It's not that, oh, until we get these things, we'll just go out and chant. No, that was nowhere in their mind. It wasn't even a possibility. We can't do Harinam without all of these things, right? But that's not what Srila Prabhupada did. He went out, he sat under a tree. There were some crazy hippies that followed him there. They were dancing around provocatively while he was chanting Hare Krishna Maha Mantra, right? But gradually, everything caught on properly, the mood changed like this, right? So to think, oh, we need this, and this before we can do Harinam, that's what we call a Bhagavad Gita level doubt. Now that's not an insult. It's just where that doubt lies is within what you would learn in Bhagavad Gita, what we should learn in Bhagavad Gita, right? So, as I mentioned earlier today, some of you heard, some of you did not, when Srila Prabhupada prepared his purports for Srimad Bhagavatam, he took into consideration that many of the readers are still going to have these doubts, these Bhagavad Gita level doubts. So within Srila Prabhupada's purports, he clears up these doubts. So it's quite good for us. So while we're reading Bhagavatam, even if we still have these doubts on whether I should really surrender unto Krishna, or if I should, you know, but I have my own idea, which is actually better if I surrender to Krishna this way, then, you know, so many more people will be attracted, or, you know, like that. We come up with all these different ideas. So since Srila Prabhupada wrote those into the Bhagavatam purports, we will still get good benefit by studying Srimad Bhagavatam. But if that's where our mind is, if that's where our doubts are, if that's where our consciousness is, then sure, these doubts may be alleviated by reading Srimad Bhagavatam, but we're not going to get the deep essence of what Srimad Bhagavatam is all about, which is how to actually apply this. Who Krishna truly is as a person. We get to understand his personality through his various incarnations. We get to see how he interacts with his devotees. And we get to see how exactly we are to apply each of these circumstances and situations, all these different pastimes. They have something to say to us and how we are to modify our behavior and our understanding to apply the philosophy in our own lives. If we go through and look at the chapters of just the first canto, for example, what are the first pastimes that come through? There's the introduction, of course. Is it Narada Muni and Vyas first?
That's the first one. And second is Ashwatthama.
Ashwatthama, then Kunti.
Yeah.
Oh, no, there's Bhishma Dev before.
I think first Kunti and then
Bhishma Dev is after Kunti. Okay. And then?
Then entering into Dwarka.
Krishna leaves there, and then, okay. So when we look at these, so first we have Srila Vyasadev's despondency, which we talked about a little bit this morning as well, right? So from that, first we learned that in order to become elevated, we have to serve the Bhakti-Vedantists, right? If we approach them properly, means he went and he let him know that, I want to learn from you. I want to also take your remnants, and they allowed. Then the proper relationship was there, and then he was able to become detached. So when his mother died, he was a very young age. He was able to understand that and not be materially attached to it, but actually focus on spirituality. So he's able to take a proper advantage of the situation, not to make excuses of why I can't do this or why I can't do that. Life is too hard, so this isn't practical for me right now. No, he did properly. Narayana previous. Then Srila Vyasadev's despondency, so I work backwards a little bit. Then Srila Vyasadeva, addressing his despondency, shows us that although in preaching, although sometimes we need to basically go down to someone's level in order to properly what's the word? Present, but what's the word when you can communicate's another word there.
Explain.
I lose words like this all the time. English is my first language, but I lose them. When you can relate to one another, that's the word I was looking for, was relate, but those were also good words because you need to communicate, but you have to be able to be on the same level. You can relate to one another. So although sometimes we have to do that, it's necessary, because otherwise you're just, speaking the highest truth and they don't know what you're talking about, So you find something that you have in common, you can relate, and then you bring them to the absolute truth. So Srila Vyasadev's despondency shows us that we shouldn't get too distracted in going down to other people's levels so that we could relate to them and then forget to offer them the actual absolute truth, right? He was despondent because people were taking these concessions that he was giving in the various branches of the Vedas, and they weren't caring so much for the actual spiritual message, the philosophy, right? And so that's why he said, okay, now you should focus just on bhakti. So it's not that we shouldn't go adjust ourselves down to different levels and so that we can relate to people. It's just that we should always be able to bring it back, right? So that's a lesson that we get from that, and we can apply it in our lives. Then Ashvatthama, man, the necessity and the power of forgiveness, right? This is something that we all have to learn. Ashvatthama committed so many heinous offenses, and somehow he was still forgiven, even after repeatedly, again and again. And then we find out later in Srimad Bhagavatam that he's going to become one of the next Saptarishis, the sages, that their duty is to lead mankind in proper ways of acting. So there are circumstances where someone who is trained properly and is elevated makes just an offense that you wouldn't imagine being able to forgive. Yet you see that the devotees forgive it. And not only do they forgive it, but then the behavior is fixed. They properly situate themselves and then become, again, a great personality, right? So these are things we learn from that pastime. The prayers of Queen Kunti are just so touching. Let these calamities come again and again, because when these happen, this is when we remember you. So we, conditioned souls, somehow these days we like to brag about how bad we have it, right? Oh, you think you have it bad? And we start listing all the things that we went through, right? And we think, I can't possibly serve Krishna right now. I have too many duties, I have too many difficulties like that, right? And something minor happens to us and we get very upset. If we're driving somewhere, someone cuts us off, we get very upset, start yelling and cursing, right? Over nothing. And Kunti Devi is asking for these calamities, and her calamities, by the way, the things that I was mentioning, they're nothing. Her calamities means like they were driven out of their homes. Their lives were, there were attempted murders on all of their lives many times, not just once. So these are real calamities. The things that we consider calamities are nothing. And she's actually saying, bring them on, because when these things were happening, we were completely just thinking of Krishna, right? We are completely depending on him. But when things are going well, then we may forget. We may forget that we have to turn to Krishna, right? We're comfortable in our lives like that. So we can start learning not only do we have nothing to complain about in our lives, but we can also see that sometimes when we have a minor inconvenience, not a calamity, let's call it a minor inconvenience because that's what it really is. But when we have these minor inconveniences, that we can actually use them to think of Krishna, right? Because we think of, so I'm driving home and somebody cuts me off and I get upset. I think, well, actually, this is a great time for me to be able to think of Krishna now because I'm driving home. Otherwise, I would have gotten home earlier. I wouldn't have been thinking about this. I would have been too caught up in doing these things. But now, since this thing happened, I can use it as an impetus to now think of Krishna and see how an actual devotee deals with an actual calamity. And for me, I'll just use it as an inspiration for when I'm mildly inconvenienced. I can at least try to think more of Krishna. Right? Bhishma Dev. Bhishma Dev teaches us so many things, but for me, he taught me detachment, right? Because Bhishma Dev throughout his life was such a great devotee. And he was so dedicated and determined in his vows, his personal vows that he made, that even though it put him essentially on the wrong side of the battle, he never lost any faith in his Lord, and he just acted accordingly, right? And there he is on his deathbed of arrows, and Maharaj Yudhishthira, who cannot be consoled by anyone, including Krishna himself, no one can console him, he goes and listens to Bhishma Dev. So first off, that shows how important Bhishma Dev is. Not only did Maharaj Yudhishthira, who couldn't even be consoled by Sri Krishna himself, but all of the different saintly personalities that were coming down and listening. There's the list, you read about all of these different personalities that come. These are big personalities. It's not like Joe from around the corner and, Harry from the hardware store. This is, the great saintly personalities. They're coming to hear this conversation because they know it's going to be good. And so he's first preaching about him, about Daivi Varnashram Dharma, the highest thing that you can actually discuss in this material world and still be about the world, right? How to actually get yourself from wherever you are to the highest actual understanding of this material world, right? Preaching him that. And then when he realizes, okay, it's time for me to go, he says, now let my thinking, feeling, and willing, which are so long been engaged in various duties and occupational activities, now be completely focused on Krishna. So he was already preaching, how to engage no matter what you have, whatever your situation is in Krishna service. But he still didn't consider that good enough because he wanted to focus on pure bhakti, right? So when we think that, oh, I'm actually doing pretty well, I've been chanting for so long and I've read this many books, and we feel sort of satisfied with our level of understanding. And then we hear that Bhishma Dev, who's lived such a devotional lifestyle and even preaching Daivi Varnashram Dharma, high level, he's still not satisfied. Now I just want to completely focus on Krishna. I was already focusing on Krishna, but it also had to do with the three modes of material nature and how to use those to escape this material world and get to Krishna. But now I'm going to even stop talking about that, because now all I want to do is completely focus on Krishna. So at any point, if we feel like we are in a good position, like I'm in a decent position. I've been around for 30 years and, I know this philosophy pretty well. And so if we think that somehow we've, reached some level of perfection or some level of, satiation where, okay, no, I think, this is a good place for me to be. Then if we hear from Bhishma Dev and we understand, okay, no, we shouldn't ever feel like that. We should always because Krishna is ever increasing, right? That means he's ever expanding. So if we're standing still, we're actually getting further away from Krishna because he's always expanding, right? We have to continue. So these are the things that we learn, right? And these are the things that we're able to apply if we've already given up these, what I call Bhagavad Gita level doubts. Now, the Bhagavad Gita level doubts, we're not even discussing any of the things that we discussed. When we hear the prayers of Queen Kunti, we're thinking of so many other things. And like I said, if we're still on this platform where, we want to do service, but we want to try to do it a different way, but I can't do it yet until I have this, and this. Like, we think that devotional service depends on some sort of external situation. That means we still are in this realm of Bhagavad Gita level doubts. So, that being said, when we realized 18 years ago that the level of questions were on that level, we said, okay, we have to go back and go through the Gita, right? Because then if we dispel these doubts beforehand, then when we go through Srimad Bhagavatam, we can learn these deeper meanings and actually be able to apply them, instead of during those same pastimes still be dealing with these, whether I should chant 15, bad rounds and one good one, or, not chant at all, or, yada, 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 right? And these were literal conversations that we were having during that time. And then not only did we want to go back and study Bhagavad Gita, we wanted to do it in such a way that we could understand the Bhagavad Gita not just in theory, but practically, and also in the knowledge, or in the language of the Vedas, right? Not just our level of understanding. So as Pandava Prabhu mentioned, and as Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu mentions, that when discussing Vedic philosophy, that there's one way to do it, and it's with Sambandha, Abhideya, Prayojana. If you're discussing it in any other way, it's superfluous. It doesn't make any sense. You don't know what you're talking about. If you're not talking about the knowledge of the relationship of the living entity, material nature, the Supreme Lord, that relationship, the goal, which is to engage in Krishna service eternally, and then the means by which you can get that goal, which is the Abhideya. If you're not understanding it in these three levels, then you're actually talking about something else, right? And we find that when we have these, what I call Bhagavad Gita level doubts, we're not actually talking about knowledge, the process, and the goal. We're talking about, we're basically, without referring to Shastra, sometimes referring to Shastra lightly, we're trying to figure out whether we should even be following this process or not, or if we should be following it in a different way, or if we should modify, like that. So after going through Bhagavad Gita chronologically, right, and Śrī Īśopaniṣad, so this is this Upanishad here, then we go through, so Pandava Prabhu spoke about Bhagavad Gita. This is going to be Śrī Īśopaniṣad. So Srila Bhakti-Vinod Thakur, as I mentioned before, he wrote this book, Sri Tattva-sutra, which is the thematic study of Śrī Īśopaniṣad. And so he breaks it down into Sambandha, Abhideya, Prayojana. And the other books that we'll also be reading in this year and the next 2 years, so Sri Tattva-sutra also goes through Sambandha, Abhideya, and Prayojana, but in 10 different divisions. Jaiva Dharma also addresses those. Bhagavad-arka Marichimala also addresses those in these 10 categories, Sambandha, Abhideya, Prayojana. So when we approach the same subject matter, but in the language that's meant to be, to describe the Vedas. And as we learned last year, it's not that Srila Prabhupada didn't present it to us this way, because he did. When we were reading the purports last year, oftentimes I would read a section and I'd look up and we'd all say Sambandha, because you would realize, oh, that's actually Sambandha. So Srila Prabhupada writes these things, but he writes it in our language when he's commenting on Bhagavad Gita, right? So he's giving us the Vedas in our language. He'll talk about knowing the position of the living entity and the Supreme Lord and what their relationship is, right? But that's Sambandha. That actually literally means Sambandha. But since he didn't say in parentheses Sambandha next to it, we have a hard time thinking, believing that Srila Prabhupada was actually talking about it for some reason in our head, right? But as we study, again, Chaitanya Charitamrita, it's quite obvious that, these aspects are there. So since we've gone through and with Srila Prabhupada presenting it to us in our language, now that we understand the language of the Vedas, if we can understand it in those terms, then we'll have a deeper understanding. And we'll be able to apply it. So it becomes more dynamic, right? We can understand it, and then we can actually know how to apply it in our lives. The better we know it. So it's as I was saying earlier this morning, we are getting the Bhagavad Gita going through chronologically gave us these tools, and then going through thematically, we're sharpening these tools, and we're learning how to properly use them, right? So that's why we spend essentially 4 years on what most devotees don't want to even spend a full year on, but they do because it tends to be a prerequisite. So, long story short. Now, the beauty of it is, as we're going through these books, because we're also going to read Laghu Bhagavatamrita, Brihad Bhagavatamrita. So we're going to get the flavor of Bhagavatam. But we're also going to know how to understand it and how to apply it before we even get there. That way, when we actually get there, that's what we're going to be focused on. We're no longer going to be focused on, getting mental and, I don't know if I could do my service this way. I think I should do it that way, or all of these things will, for the most part, be cleared up, right? And so then we can take better advantage of what's coming from Srimad Bhagavatam. Otherwise, you can study Srimad Bhagavatam right now. You'll get something out of it. You'll help clear up these other doubts that you have. But if you really want to get the juice of Srimad Bhagavatam, this is the way to do it, to make sure. And as I started to say, but I got sidetracked, the beauty of it is that if we understand the philosophy and appreciate it, even though we're dealing with what some would call lower level books, they're not. Brahma Samhita is not a lower level book. Everything is there, right? We're going to be going through that next, actually, after Śrī Īśopaniṣad. So we're going to be getting these things, but we're going to be getting them in the context of being able to understand. So by the time we get to Srimad Bhagavatam, we're going to be actually ready for Srimad Bhagavatam. And we're not going to feel like we've wasted any time or, like that. So, that said, before we start this introduction, that took, half hour. Are there any questions just on what we just discussed? Does anyone think we should just skip to Srimad Bhagavatam? Should I set this aside and get to the grit? No?
Can you just repeat what was like the conclusion from the story of Vyasa and Narada? Like the doubt that
the despondency. What was you mean the practical application of it?
Because you were saying what you can learn from different.
So one of the things I said about that was when we're preaching, and sometimes we bring ourselves down to whoever we're preaching to's level in order to, what was the word again? Relate? Is that the word I said? Forgot it again. So the danger is that we can stay down on that level and not remember that actually we're meant to be bringing them. So one of the common examples long ago is when the devotees started preaching in the yoga scene. This was in the early. What we saw was that the yoga people ended up preaching to those devotees, and these devotees ended up becoming yogis. They were trying to bridge the gap between where they were and where they should be in bhakti, and they crossed that bridge, but didn't come back. And then they opened some studios and they chant Om, and it's unfortunate. So not only do we want to be careful when we do that, we want to make sure that we're always bringing it back to bhakti, right? Because if Srila Vyasadeva was despondent, then we should also feel quite dissatisfied if we're not completely focusing on bhakti, if we're getting lost in these distractions. And there are other things that we learned from these pastimes. These were I wanted to quickly go through and give some examples. Some of these pastimes you learn like 6, 7, 8 different things just from a few verses, right? There's so many aspects that you can get where you can apply in your life. Yeah. So, but we don't actually get there until we get to this point where, we can actually move like that. So, another example is, mathematics. There's so many different, there's addition and subtraction, and there's calculus, and then there's beyond calculus, right? Usually people don't get to calculus, so they think that's like the highest, but there are these crazy, well, fractals is part of calculus too, but there's these crazy things where you have matrices, you have these grids of numbers, and you have to know how to add and multiply them in order to, there's a lot involved. Statistics is crazy, mathematics, probability, statistics. But it's all mathematics, and it's all quite logical if you can follow the logic. But you can't expect to, before you master addition and subtraction, be able to master algebra, for example. And that's just one step up, unless you want trigonometry before algebra. I don't think. Depends on which way you want to go. So the idea is it's better to master the preliminaries so that when you get to the next one, then it actually just makes logical sense. When people study through math, it's not that they get to a point and they're like, oh no, this is completely bewildering. It's completely unlike anything that I've ever, no, it follows something. But then the more you know, the more you realize, and then you can apply that. And you see, oh, that's how this applies. But if I didn't know this, I wouldn't know how it would apply. So in the same way, with the process of bhakti, there are different levels of understanding. And like I said, Srila Prabhupada, he took that into account when giving us the purport to Śrīmad Bhagavatam. So even if we have these lower doubts, they will be addressed. But then the upper ones also can't be addressed at the same time, right? It's not that, I'm trying to figure out whether or not I should, chant because my chanting's offensive. And then all of a sudden, I'm also, being able to apply this, this thing, until you actually settle that doubt, you're not going to be able to apply anything else, right? So, the one other thing I was going to say before we start the introduction. So, Sambandha, Abhideya, Prayojana. It's within everything, as Pandava Prabhu was mentioning this morning. And it's not that, so here we're going to go through in order, Sambandha, Abhideya, Prayojana of these books, right? But it's not that that's how we necessarily present things, right? So a salesman, for example, they always present the prayojana first, the goal, right? Because they want to build up a demand. So they'll say, do you want to be rich? Or do you want to be comfortable? Or do you want to be cutting edge? Or do you want to be among the elite, right? That's the goal. They're talking about the goal. And you're thinking, yes, I do, actually. Yes. Okay. Then from there, they drop down to Sambandha. Now, this, you're here, and this is what your goal is. So this is why this is very important to you. And then you get even more attached. So first it was just an idea, but now it's the idea which relates to me. Now I'm really, you really got me there, because before it was an idea, but I didn't think it was possible for me to get something like that. But now you showed me the relation, right? So they start with Prayojana, then Sambandha, and then the Abhideya is, all you have to do is give me this much money, right? The process to get from where you are to what you want, right? They always end with the Abhideya. They don't walk up to you and say, hey, you got, $9,000? No, they say, here is this thing that, you can't live without it. This is your goal, right? And then I'll show you, because this is what you're doing now, and if you had this, then it would be so much easier, you have a relationship. And then, no, you just give me the 9,000. And now you give me the 9,000. But you don't have 9,000, no problem. You can make, 10 easy payments of 1,500, over time, like that. So salesmen do like this: Prayojana, Sambandha, Abhideya. We find in Bhagavad Gita it goes through. It doesn't just go. It's you have this, and then you have that, but then there's doubt. You got to go back. So then there's more Sambandha, and then so throughout our process, it's important to understand not only what these are, but when they are applicable. So if we're feeling disconnected, right? We're having a low period in our devotional, career. Sure. I think there was another word, but that works. and we feel, we're not so inspired. We've been doing the service, but we, somehow. So then we need to remind, right? And we also need to remind ourselves of the relationship between us and. So it's not just an unobtainable goal, right? Even if we remember what the goal is, if we think it's unobtainable, but we don't understand that Sambandha, then that Abhideya, it's we're not going to be inspired to keep doing that, right? So we have to know for ourselves and also for others when we're preaching, what is the thing that currently they need? Do they need to understand what the relationship is? Do they need to be reminded of what the goal is? Or do they understand both of those things and then need to just understand how to get from where they are to what they want? So we need to think in these terms, right? Whether we call them Sambandha, Abhideya, Prayojana, or call them something else. Pandit who was talking this morning about how Varnashram dharmas throughout the entire universe, but in the different dvipas, they're called by different names. They have Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishya, Shudra, but they're called something else, right? And I was thinking then also in America, we also have, but we call them something else. We call them administrators, like that. But then we put people who work for salary and administrative positions, and it doesn't work out properly because we don't know. So whatever language we call these, we need to know. We need to understand the relationships between things. We need to understand what the goal is, and we need to understand how to get that goal. What process do we need to go through to get that, right? And so these are the terms that we need to understand the Vedas in. So this is the Vedas language. And so going through it this way, then we get a better idea of, what these are. Then when we're reading Srila Prabhupada's purports again after this, then it's coming up all the time. Oh, this is Abhideya. Oh, this is Sambandha. Oh, this is Prayojana, right? And then thanks to Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, who breaks up Sambandha into, I think, 7 or 8, different aspects. You'll see that Sambandha is actually several different aspects of Sambandha. And then you have Abhideya and Prayojana. So then we can even take it further, like what part of the knowledge of the relationship is this? Is this, so we're going to go through those in the introduction. So when we start seeing in that light, then, like I said, it's like sharpening our instruments. So then when we get to Srimad Bhagavatam, the philosophical part, we'll automatically understand what's being said, and we won't have any doubts about it because we'll understand it. Then we'll be able to do the next part, which is apply it, the Abhideya, right? So, yes, I think that's all I wanted to say on the Atriya.
So, if I understand it properly, by the end of reading Bhagavad Gita, we should be on the level of surrender. And we are on this level that we can commit also to the process which is described in Bhagavatam, as the Abhideya mostly.
Yeah, at least in theory, we should understand that we should be surrendering to Krishna. We may still be, not exactly sure what that means, because Srimad Bhagavatam lets us know what that means, right? So at least theoretically, we should understand that, okay, I'm to surrender to Krishna. Then we can start to appreciate Bhagavatam. The more we are actually surrendered to Krishna, not just in theory or in faith, but the more we actually are completely detached and we understand, okay, this is Krishna's. A lot of this can be understood by the way we pray, right? When we communicate with the Lord, how do we pray? Some people pray, "Dear Lord, the weather is terrible right now. It's killing people. Do you think that you could, change the weather? Thank you." Or, "Dear Lord, my uncle is having a heart attack. Can you please heal him? Reach down with your healing hand." Or, "Hey, there's this war going on. Do you think you can?" So essentially, what these prayers are, if you take a step back from all of that and detach yourself emotionally from, because we're talking about your uncle and this and that and the other thing. So there's a relationship. It's sometimes hard to step back. But if you see someone else praying for these things and you're able to see it from an objective point of view, essentially what you're saying with those prayers is, hey God, you're doing it wrong. This is the right way to do it. And I know this because I'm better than you. Right? Now, we really wouldn't have the audacity to say that to God, but when we pray like this, that's actually what we're doing. Because if everything's in God's hands, then He's already, in control. And we tend to not realize that our misuse of our free will has consequences. And so therefore, collectively and individually, there will be calamities. Actual calamities, not just inconveniences like we talked about earlier, right? So when our prayers become less about that, like here's this terrible thing, God, why don't you just do it this way? When it becomes less about that and more about, dear Lord, I'm completely surrendered unto you. Please help me see what your plan is so that I may serve you better, right? These things are happening, the weather's bad, my uncle's got a heart attack and there's a war. Let me know where this is going so that I can actually serve you better, right? When our prayers get closer to that, then we're going to be able to appreciate Śrīmad Bhagavatam and be able to apply it in our lives, right? But as long as we think, no, that person's doing that wrong, this person's doing that wrong, I know everybody should just listen to me. I don't know why they don't listen to me, right? If everybody just listened to me, the whole world would be perfect. But no, right? As long as we have this mentality, we're essentially thinking that we're better than God. And so that's not a position where you can actually understand Śrīmad Bhagavatam from. You can get something from it. You'll always get something from reading Bhagavatam. Right? But what you get from it, that's a different thing. Did that answer your question, or did I go on a tangent? Okay, because I do that sometimes. If I do, you can pull me back. Like, that's not what I said. I didn't say, give me a list of things. I wanted to know the least amount of things that we could, right? I tell that story all the time.
Yeah, answer
This relation with prayers helps a lot.
What's that?
This relation with the prayers, how we approach them, this helps a lot to understand.
Yeah. Also, when we're reading through Śrīmad Bhagavatam, there's so many prayers, and they actually follow sort of a format. The more you read through them, you see, because first there's these we probably would consider them on a neophyte level, the boring sort of all in reverence type, stuff. We have the Supreme Lord, cause of all causes, like that. And then they go into the other things, and then different glorifications, and then sometimes there's a prayer for some benediction, or sometimes it's like that. But we can see how these saintly persons pray. And it's usually not how we pray. So when we get closer to how they pray, then we're going to be in good shape. So that's also a thing that we can do when we're reading like Queen Kunti's prayers, or anybody's prayers for that, prayers personified Vedas. We see that there's sort of there's things that you do, right? For whatever reason. But yeah. But something else before we actually start the introduction to this particular book? Okay. Because it's important, otherwise you just start going through and people are like, hey man, why are we spending 4 years on this? Come on, let's get to this stuff. So, okay, so we understand. It's definitely worth it. I can say that. Yeah, more.
One more question. That's quite complex, but I try to explain. Prabhupada mentioned in letter to Deputy Prime Minister of India in 49 or 47. He narrated 4 levels of development of society. One was Harina movement, Harina movement, temple entry movement.
What's the second?
Temple entry.
Harinam, temple entry.
Then initiation, and then Varnashram. So I'm trying to somehow relate where we are with this understanding of our study, if we can relate it somehow to these levels.
What year did you say it was?
First one, Harinam.
No, you said he wrote the letter in which year?
I think 1947, I think it was, to Deputy Prime Minister of India. He was canvassing the proper development of society.
Okay.
Because this was the time when Prabhupada was approaching all these government officials.
Yeah.
He was trying to preach here in India.
Was that, when did he meet Srila Bhakti-siddhanta Saraswati Thakur? 32. So, tell me again.
Harinam,
Harinam,
then temple entry.
temple entry means,
Basically like deity worship.
okay.
Harinam is basically chanting the holy name. How
Okay.
we reach.
Then Varnashram,
Then is initiation.
initiation,
Then Varnashram.
Varnashram. Interesting. I'll have to think more about that. Harinam, temple entry, initiation, Varnashram. Yeah, I mean, I like it. It's amazing. Because before he met Srila Bhakti-siddhanta Saraswati Thakur, he was a follower of Gandhi. So his first meeting with Srila Bhakti-siddhanta Saraswati Thakur, he basically said that, before we can actually gain any ground with this spiritual side, we have to first get our independence, right? And so Srila Bhakti-siddhanta Saraswati Thakur completely just shut that down, because nothing material can hold you back from spiritual growth. So him then writing a world leader and then giving these four. So obviously Harinam is the most important, because without it, you're not going to understand reality. The Cetodarpana Marjanam, it actually helps you. It cleanses your consciousness and then helps you become able to actually understand, right? Then enter the temple means then you start, like you said, you basically start deity worship, not necessarily directly pujari, but you're now understanding not just the chanting and getting the purification, but then you're seeing the Supreme Lord there, and you're trying to serve him properly, at least in the temple. Then with initiation, then you understand then how to continue to do that also outside of the temple in your daily lives. You're making a lifelong commitment to make this your life. And then Varnashrama. So in terms of society, because he's talking to a leader, yeah, there has to be the purification, which comes through Harinam, the further fructification of that chanting by going to the temple, getting sadhu sangha, and also worshiping the deity. So there's, you go through also Shraddha, sadhu sangha, bhajana kriya. So then initiation, bhajana kriya. But then also after that, understanding who we are, what our position is, what we can do, what our nature is, as we were going through in the class this morning. No matter what your nature is, you can come to Krishna. So understanding what that nature is and how to properly use it in Krishna service, and that's Varnashram. So I don't know if that answered your question, but I like the process of it. I didn't relate it to this though. Yeah, I'd have to think about that. That's the first time I heard about that list, but I like it.
As a letter to Mahatma Gandhi?
No, to, was it Prime Minister?
It was Deputy Prime Minister.
Deputy Prime Minister of India at the time, 47? Yeah, he would write politicians from time to time. That was his idea. Because if you get the politicians, then everyone has to follow. And then we had the Beatles.
Maybe you can send this as a food for thought, and we can get additional discussion.
Yeah. Yeah, if I gave it more thought, then I be able to speak more. Means in terms of Sambandha Abhidheya Prayojana, that's what you mean?
I was thinking more of this breaking point of surrender, and then going for Bhagavatam. So progression, you know, that can lead this to.
Right. Yeah, I'll give it some thought. Okay. So then we'll start. 55 minutes. Worth it, I think. Okay, so introduction. So a lot of this beginning part will be very similar to what Pandavaji covered this morning, Pandava Mishai, because we're going to talk about these, the 10 esoteric truths and how they fit into. It'll be a little unique because this is going to talk about how those fit into the 5 topics of the Upanishads. 5 main topics. So introduction. The thematic study shows how topics discussed in Śrī Īśopaniṣad fall into the categories of Vastu-traya, which is Sambandha, Abhideya, Prayojana, the 5 main topics of the Upanishads, and the 10 esoteric truths of the Gaudiya Vaishnava philosophy, Dasamul Tattva. The 5 main topics of the Upanishads are as follows. Actually, he did mention this a little bit, Chirachita Ishvara, but he didn't, I don't think he addressed them as the 5 topics of the Upanishads. So, the nature of Brahman, which is Ishvara, the nature of the soul and its relation to Brahman, which is Chit, the material energy, its origin and connection to Brahman, Achit, the means of attaining Brahman, Sadhana, and the nature of the supreme goal and the status of the jiva in mukti, sadhya. Who wants to guess what's our term for the means of attaining Brahman? Yeah? Abhideya, good. How about the nature of the supreme goal and the status of the jiva in mukti? Supreme goal. Close, but origin, yeah, because of the goal. Otherwise, yeah, I can see how. I would think Sambandha. The other 3 are within Sambandha. The nature of Brahman, the nature of the soul and the material energy and its relationship and its connection to Brahman. So, continuing. The first 3 topics delineate Sambandha. The 4th defines Abhideya. And the 5th describes Prayojana. The thematic study shows how Śrī Īśopaniṣad analyzes these 5 topics and resolves the different interpretations of other schools of Vedic philosophy, right? So we often will hear, sometimes it's from other devotees who've heard from others or the actual other branches, different ideas of how to interpret or to accept the Vedas, right? So it's good for us to understand some of these so that we know not to fall into the wrong understanding. So, for example, the Sahajiyas, they pay too much attention to the Prayojana, right? So they know that they want the highest goal, to dance with Sri Hari, right? And they have some knowledge, right? They know that Raganuga Bhakti is actually superior to Vaidhi in that sense, because Vaidhi Bhakti gets you liberated to Vaikuntha. But Raganuga Bhakti, that'll get you to Goloka. Right? But although they have that knowledge, they misinterpret that knowledge. And so they say that you shouldn't do Vaidhi. You just have to somehow magically, there's no logic involved in it, but somehow magically one day you're going to be spontaneously attached to Krishna. But definitely don't try to do the Vaidhi, because then you're going to get trapped in this Vaikuntha nonsense, right? They have this, so it doesn't make any sense. They're too focused on the goal. They think they're going to get the highest by doing absolutely nothing. So they don't have really Abhideya. They just think somehow magically it's going to happen. But the truth is they're spontaneously attached to enjoying material energy. And until they follow Vaidhi and redirect that spontaneous attachment from enjoying material energy with me as the center to understanding how everything is meant to be utilized in the service of Krishna. Until they do that, they won't have the proper understanding, and therefore they're also not going to be applying it properly, right? So when we have a misbalanced Sambandha Abhideya Prayojana, we can come to an improper conclusion. And so Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur will point out some of these different interpretations and resolve them to show how actually, no, that's wrong. So we don't fall into these traps of, oh yeah, someone's talking something about the Vedas, so that they're speaking my language, so I'll listen to them, and then I'll go back and tell the devotees what I've learned. But if it's misinformation, it's good that we prepare ourselves to be able to spot these things, understand how, what the actual proper Siddhanta is, right? One example, after I just met the devotees, I didn't know much about devotional service, but I knew just basically what some of the other very brand new bhaktas were telling me, right? And so one story that I was told, it was mixing up the pastime of Lord Hanuman, bringing the mountain of herbs to cure Lakshman, and Govardhan Leela. It was a mixture of the two. So the story that I was told was that Krishna, when he was a young boy, somebody got sick and there was herbs on a mountain, so he picked up the mountain with his left hand on his pinky, and he brought it over, and because in other words, some stories got mixed up, and then by the time they got to me, it was a complete jumble of stories. So I was also then telling the story to like my parents and whoever was listening, to show them how amazing Krishna is, right? Which that's that whatever, it's a misunderstanding of some facts. At least it's not a different philosophy. But sometimes, just to make the point, sometimes when we're new or we're not quite clear of what's actually real, we just take anything that is somewhat related. Another thing I did very early on was I went to a store in my town. There was a store that had different things that were imported from various countries. So there were some things from India. So I went there, and there was this book called Gods and Goddesses of India. So I bought that book. I was like, yeah, all right, this is going to teach me some more about Krishna. And then they had this little brass Murti of Lord Shiva. Okay, Shiva's mentioned in there, Brahma, Vishnu, Shiva. And so they didn't have a Krishna one. So I bought this Shiva Murti. And I was told that, you offer incense to the deity. So I'm offering incense to Lord Shiva. Because, I got whatever I could get my hands on, and it had something to do with India. And I was told that you offer the incense, So sometimes we have these good intentions, but without understanding actually properly, we end up doing the wrong thing. Now, in my case, both of the stories I've told, it didn't end up being like a crazy, like definitely wrong thing. But it was definitely a misguided thing that could have been done in a better way, and otherwise misinformation. Because that's not why Krishna lived at Govardhan Hill, right? Maybe in some other yuga, yeah, go ahead.
I just remember this story about Prabhupada, that I think it was in Amsterdam. There was a yagya, the TV was there, and Prabhupada said, where are the fruits for the duration of the yagya? He just said, where are the fruits, bring the fruits. So the devotees, they told that he wants a fruit salad.
Yeah.
So 20 minutes later, they came with fruit salad.
No.
Even more angry.
Yeah.
So it also shows that you don't try to understand, rather you just collect some facts in your mind.
Do what you think is, Yeah, so it's important to understand actually what we're doing, why we're doing it. So if we understand Sambandha Abhideya Prayojana, then we're not going to spend too much time on one or the other. So we don't become sahajis by focusing too much on one goal. We don't, because that would be more focused on Abhideya. He asked for fruits, let's make it really nice, because the process was, Srila Prabhupada wants fruits, so let's make really nice cut up and, of good variety. Here, So they thought that was the process, but it wasn't, because they didn't understand the relationship between, in other words, the relationship between the disciple and spiritual master. Sure, if Srila Prabhupada wanted fruits in general, yeah, then that was the proper thing to give. But no, he wanted it for the fire sacrifice. So that relationship needed to be known. So there was focus in the wrong area there. So when we can understand what the relationship is, what the circumstance is, and what's actually needed, then we can actually then perform the proper avideya and then get the proper prayojana. Otherwise, we can get mixed up in so many different ways. Okay. So then the Gaudiya Siddhanta is based on the teachings of the Upanishads and Vedanta Sutra. Therefore, it is not surprising that all tenets of our philosophy can be traced back to the 5 main topics of the Upanishads. Right. Regarding the first topic, the nature of Brahman, the central issue is whether Brahman is without characteristics. This is the impersonal concept called nirvishesha, or he has characteristics, that is savishesha doctrine, maintained by the Vaishnavas. Below is the specific answer to this, as given in Dashamul Tattva. Number 1. The Vedas are the principal scriptural evidence, which in turn expound the following 9 principles. So number 1, as Pandava Mashai pointed out this morning, is Praman. The other 9 will be Prameya, what we are to learn from the Praman. So first is the establishing the authority of the Vedas. It's Apaurushaya, it's infallible, so we can accept it completely. Any other source is not going to be infallible, because it's given to us by someone who is fallible. So the things we are to gain from this is 2. Krishna is the supreme absolute truth. 3. Krishna is omnipotent. 4. He is the fountainhead of all relationships and love. Regarding the second topic, so that was the first topic of the 5, Brahman, Ishvara. Regarding the second topic, which is the nature of the jiva, the question is whether it is different from Brahman or identical in all aspects with him. Dasamul Tattva answers as follows. Number 5, the living entities are Krishna's separated parts and parcels. The living entity, due to his constitutional situation as the marginal energy, may come under the sway of material energy. Number 7, again, due to his marginal nature, the living entity in the liberated condition is free from the influence of material nature. Right? So depending on the living entity's consciousness, he can either be under the influence of material nature or transcendental to material nature. Concerning the third point of the 5 topics of the Upanishads, which is the material energy, the key issue is whether it is created by Brahman and if it is real or illusory. The Dasamul Tattva is stated. Number 8, the living entity and everything in the material world, cosmos, is simultaneously one and different from the Supreme Lord Krishna. So, of course, we know in which ways we are the same and which ways we are different. Then the 4th major question, so the 4th of those 5, the means of attaining Brahman. Sadhana, the answer is as follows, which is number 9 in the Dashama. Pure devotional service is the living entity's occupation and means. So that's the Abhideya, pure devotional service. And then regarding the 5th point of the topics of the Upanishads, which is the nature of the supreme goal, the major issue is whether the jiva merges in the Brahman, which is the opinion of the impersonalist, or retains its individuality in the state of liberation as told by the Vaishnavas. According to the Dashamul Tattva, number 10, pure love of Krishna is the living entity's ultimate goal. So, prayojana. Dasamul Tattva describes 9 principles, prameyas, which are based on the authority of the Vedas, Praman. The thematic study will show that the mantras from Śrī Īśopaniṣad are the very same praman mentioned in the beginning of the Dasamul Tattva, Amnaya Praha Tattvam. Thus, Śrī Īśopaniṣad, which is renowned as the Acharya among the Shrutis, is the Lord's own answer to the 5 questions of the Vedantic discourse, and the authority behind the tenets of the Gaudiya Siddhanta. Our guide through these matters will be the Śrī Tattva-sutra, Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur's framework for studying the Vedanta philosophy. Śrī Tattva-sutra contains 5 chapters. The first chapter describes the Supreme Lord, Ishvara. The second chapter explains the nature of the living entities, Chit. The third chapter discusses the material nature, Achit. And these 3 chapters outline Sambandha. The fourth chapter explains Abhideya, how the living entities should manipulate the material nature in order to attain the supreme goal, sadhana. The 5th chapter describes Prayojana, the nature of that supreme goal, which is sadhya. After each chapter, there is a summary of the sutras. Whenever appropriate, the sutras and the purports of Śrī Tattva-sutra are connected to the mantras and the purports of Śrī Īśopaniṣad. So it means we go through Śrī Tattva-sutra. Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur is referring to different mantras in Śrī Īśopaniṣad. So sometimes the mantra will be repeated, or Srila Prabhupada's commentary will also be given for extra explanation on those specific sutras in Śrī Tattva-sutra. And so last year when we went through Śrī Īśopaniṣad, as we were going through verse by verse, we were referring to parts of Śrī Tattva-sutra. So we weren't doing Śrī Tattva-sutra in order, we were doing it as it appeared through the mantras. So now we're just doing it in the different order. So from Sambandha, Abhideya, Prayojana. Okay, part 1, Sambandha. Topic 1, the nature of Brahman. And these are discussed in the invocation of Śrī Īśopaniṣad and mantras 4, 5, and 8. And here's the invocation. The personality of Godhead is perfect and complete, and because he is completely perfect, all emanations from him, such as this phenomenal world, are perfectly equipped as complete wholes. Then, such a person, the Mahabhagavat described in mantras 6 and 7, this is verse 8 by the way, must factually know the greatest of all, the personality of Godhead, who is unembodied, omniscient, beyond reproach, without veins, pure and uncontaminated, the self-sufficient philosopher who has been fulfilling everyone's desire since time immemorial. Srila Prabhupada explains the nature of Brahman in his purport to the invocation verse. The complete whole, or the supreme absolute truth, is the complete personality of Godhead. Realization of the personality of Godhead is realization of the all-transcendental features, Sat, Chit, and Ananda, bliss. When one realizes the Supreme Person, he realizes these aspects of the absolute truth in their completeness. The complete whole is not formless. If he were formless, or if he were less than his creation in any other way, he could not be complete. The complete whole must contain everything both within and beyond our experience, otherwise he cannot be complete. So, Srila Prabhupada points this out often, but sometimes the impersonalists, for example, since they have experience that the material world is miserable and the material body is miserable, they say, well, then the Lord can't have these things because these things are miserable. So he can't have a form, he can't have pastimes, right? He can't have any of these things. They logically come to these conclusions because these things are miserable and he can't be miserable. So therefore he doesn't have a form, he doesn't have qualities, he doesn't have pastimes, right? They don't understand that he is actually a person and he has form, quality, and pastimes, but they're not material. So material form, qualities, and pastimes are miserable, right? So until we're able to understand this, then we can't actually understand the Supreme Lord. We can understand him partially with one of his features, maybe Brahman or Paramatma, but in order to understand him. And so the way that Srila Prabhupada points this out is, since personality exists here in the material world, then it also has to exist within him, but in its perfected state, right? It's pure state. So he has form, he has personality, but they're in their pure state. Satchidananda Vigraha, right? The nature of Brahman is summarized in the Dashamul Tattva as follows. In Sanskrit, das with nach is 10, right? But in Bengali, it's dash. Because like Dasarath is 10 chariots, but it's not Dasharath. So Bengali is dash, it's 10. Because I remember the first time I read Dashamul, I was like, wouldn't it be Dasamul? Not with a long A, you know, just Das. But it's Dasha. Yeah, Doshamul. Yeah.
So how is it written?
So I think it's the Bengali 10.
Like Hindi is also Das.
But Das, right? With just S with not the sh.
Can be that the Bengali is closer to Sanskrit than Hindi also.
But Dasarath, that's Sanskrit, and that's Dasarath, it's not Dasharath.
They don't have.
But the Bengalis call them Dasharath, don't they?
They don't have. Yes.
In Bengali.
They have similar letters.
Do they have two shas? Do they have sha and sha? Yes.
They are mostly pronouncing the same. They are not much distinguishing.
But the tas are very different. The ta and ta.
The three or two sh. And you put here,
Yeah.
there.
So that's the Krishna one. And then just sha. And then there's another sha too, in Bengali. All right, Krishna. It's very, you almost have to understand also like the way that the French move their tongue when they speak and they speak through their nose sometimes. Anyway, so that's what. So the nature of Brahman is summarized in the Dashamul Tattva as follows. 1. The Vedas are the principal scriptural evidence, which in turn expound that 2. Krishna is the supreme absolute truth. 3. Krishna is omnipotent. And 4. He is the fountainhead of all relationships and love. So chapter 1 of Śrī Tattva-sutra, Tattva Prakarana, the truth. Yes.
In Sanskrit, 10 is Dasham.
Shum. Dasham.
It's same Shava instead.
Yeah. Okay, I didn't know. So his name is then Dasharath. Dasharath. Okay. I remember because when I first when I became initiated and I went to write my name in Sanskrit, I didn't put the long A, and I was told no, that means 10. Sure. And then another one. Oh, okay. So we have to learn how to actually say those properly.
And to see how to write on Bengali.
Yeah.
If you read on Bengali, you can understand what.
Right. Okay. So this is the introduction of Śrī Tattva-sutra by Srila Bhakti-yoga Thakur. This tattva-sutra is obtained and proven by the eternal realization. Therefore, it can be known as the very essence of the Vedas. So quite important. This originated from the Supreme Lord, Sri Krishna Chaitanya, and hence is the origin of all the revealed scriptures. Only the reality has been accepted in this treatise. So nothing superfluous. Whatever's in here is quite important, is the essence. Along with the accomplishment of the absoluteness of the reality, a doubt may arise that if the reality itself is the universal unity, then where is the necessity of imagining any other object apart from it? For the clarification of this doubt, the word tattva has been qualified as para, supreme. Here, it should be considered that the author has only denoted the divinity by the appellation of tattva. The chit and achit, the sentient and non-sentient, are called the appellation of pradartha, object. These chit and achit are enumerated among the objects of the phenomenal world. Because of the incomprehensibility of the divinity, it cannot be called as an object. If any word mentioned expresses some meaning, then that word can be called as pada, as the object denoted by that pada is also padartha. These objects lie within the reasoning of human beings, but the divinity is beyond the human reasoning. For this reason, the supreme reality is known as tattva and not padartha. The Supreme Lord is quite distinct from the phenomenal objects, but no object can have its existence separately from the Supreme Lord. This fact is evident from the realization though not understandable to the human logic, right? So there's some things that we have to understand through praman, through faith, that we may not actually be able to understand logically because our senses are imperfect. We have a tendency to commit mistakes. There's another one before cheating, propensity. Isn't there another one before cheating?
Mistake.
Falling into illusion.
Illusion, yeah, illusion, and then so I like to present these in this way. So even if our senses were perfect, let's take that one off the table. Let's say our senses are perfect. Everything we see is true, and there's no misinterpretation. Even if our senses are perfect, then we have the tendency to commit mistakes, right? So even brilliant mathematicians, sometimes when they're doing their calculations, they accidentally change like a negative to a positive, or they say 1 + 1 is 3 sometimes, or just simple mistakes. We commit mistakes. So even if our senses are perfect, right, we have the tendency sometimes we make mistakes, right? Like me, I forget words all the time. That's a mistake, right? But even if we didn't commit any mistakes, our senses are perfect. We can trust everything that comes through our senses, and we don't commit any mistakes. We're subject to illusion, right? Which means that we can't actually determine the difference between what's real and what's not real. And this is proven by any time you go to see a magician. He pulls a quarter out of your ear, and you're like, "Oh wow, he just pulled the quarter." No, he didn't. He had it in his hand; it was hidden, and then he went behind your head. But there's so many other things that a magician will do that you can't just very easily explain, like I did, and you become bewildered, right? So we're an illusion. But even if our senses were perfect, we didn't commit any mistakes, and we were not subject to any amount of illusion whatsoever, we have a tendency to cheat. So even if I know 100% that this thing is bad for me, if I want it, I'm going to do it, right? So we'll cheat, right? So we can see that we have all of these things, but even if we didn't have some of them, just one would even be enough, right? So in this way, we can't trust our senses. We can't trust that we're not going to make a mistake. We can't trust that we're actually properly distinguishing illusion from reality unless we're getting from Shabda. And we also, sometimes we don't even know when we're cheating ourselves, right? The tendency to cheat is sometimes like, the example often is given with medicine, right? We know that if we're sick, we feel really bad, but if we take this medicine, we're going to be okay. But the medicine doesn't taste very good, so I took that medicine last time and it wasn't good. But then the intelligence says, yeah, but remember the last time you didn't like the taste of the medicine, but then you did feel better. But then, then the mind can still reject it. The mind can still sort of like, if the senses are appalled enough by the taste, then the intelligence can also go the other way and say, Yeah, it did make you feel better, but maybe time would also, maybe that was just a coincidence. Maybe even if we didn't take the medicine, we would have still felt better. So maybe it had nothing to do with it, So depending on who's the boss at the time. So if the senses are the boss, the senses can influence the intelligence. Sometimes if the mind is the boss, because generally the mind, is the boss, because whatever the intelligence cooks up, then mind accepts it or rejects it. And whether it was good intelligence or not, it doesn't matter. But then the intelligence is actually superior. So if we're exercising it in the proper way, then, senses, then, mind and intelligence. And preferably, we're not even dealing with false ego because we're dealing with the real ego because we can properly identify as the servant of Krishna. But since we're not, sometimes we even are cheating ourselves and we don't even know it, right? So this is why it's important, the first item, the praman, to understand that if we actually want absolute truth, then we have to get it from the Vedas. And how do we get it from the Vedas? We actually have to get it through our spiritual master, because if we approach the Vedas directly, we're going to perceive something wrong because we have imperfect senses when we're reading. We're going to commit mistakes. We're going to interpret something the wrong way. We're going to be in illusion whether something is actually right or not. Maybe we'll come up with an impersonal idea, and or we'll cheat ourselves. We'll see, okay, well, I understand that this is what it's all about, but I'm not going to do it anyway. Like, people know that smoking is bad for your health. It says it right on the box. By law, it has to say on the box that some version of this is bad for you. Sometimes it'll say it'll kill you. Sometimes it'll say it'll cause birth defects. Sometimes it'll say it'll cause cancer or emphysema, etc. But it says it right on there. It's definitely bad for you. Everyone knows it. But they do it anyway, right? They're cheating themselves. Because their senses say, I don't even know what the senses say in that situation. It'll make you look cool, or it'll make you feel, I don't know what it does. But somehow, whatever it is working because people continue to do it, right? So because of this, we have to not only just approach the Vedas, but we have to do it in a proper way. So we have to find an authorized spiritual master. And then what do? We just say, all right, authorized spiritual master, give me the goods. Do we pay him something? Do we just demand, you give me this? What do we do? Because I don't know. Can someone tell me? How do we, what's this? What's that mean?
He's very humbly approach spiritual master.
Humbly approach the spiritual master. Okay, and?
Serve him.
Serve him. Okay, sounds like a lot of work, but, and then?
And ask proper questions.
And ask proper questions. I guess that's logical. But where are you getting this from? Are you just making this up?
Came from upstairs.
Yeah?
From Bhagavad
What, Bhagavad Gita 434? Is that what you're quoting me right now? Yeah, of course. So we want the Vedic knowledge, which is Aparusha. It's infallible, but we have to get it through the proper channels. Otherwise, it will be fallible because we're dealing with our own senses. And if we pick someone that's not authorized, then we're dealing with their imperfect senses. So Bhagavad Gita 434 says, because the spiritual master has seen the truth, right? So he's authorized. Therefore, you approach him humbly and submissively, inquire submissively, offer service. Just try not to render service unto him, and he can give you this transcendental knowledge because he has seen the truth, right? So this is the way. Not only do we have to approach the Vedas, but we have to approach it in the authorized way, which is also given by the Vedas. Just like you find out who your father is, you ask your mother tells you, and you take her word. I mean, these days your mother might lie to you, but the Vedas, not so much. So this is the importance of not only accepting the Vedas, but doing it through the proper channels. So, therefore, in this topic of reality, the first aphorism has been established by the author as follows. So that's the introduction. We will start tomorrow with the first sutra. So Pandavaji covered 20 pages. We covered 5.5, but I'm happy with that. Are there any questions on what we talked about today?
What was the doubt about when we were describing the 5 scriptures of the Īśopaniṣad about the matter, is it subordinate to the Lord or separate?
Where are you looking at?
We were discussing the 5 topics of the Upanishads, Ishvara,
You're on page 3.
Shiva.
Ishvara, Chit, Achit, Sadhana, and Sadhya.
So then we get the doubts like if Brahman is personal, impersonal, if Jiva is separated from Brahman or is Brahman itself. And then the next one for matter.
Whether it's created by Brahman, if it's real or illusory, that's where you are?
The matter?
Matter means concerning the third point, which is material energy. The key issue is whether it is created by Brahman and if it's real or illusory. Is that what you mean? Yeah, because then you have the Achincha Beta Beta Tattva, which to some seems like it would be a cop-out for anything you can't explain. But you actually can explain it logically because everything comes from the Supreme Lord, but he's not controlled by it, right? So material nature comes from him. Everything that exists is nothing but him, right? So this bottle, this thing, everything, it's part of him. But he's not subject to the 3 modes of material nature, even though he is within everything that is influenced by the 3 modes of nature because he's transcendental. So we, the living entities, since we're part of him, we have the same qualities, but we don't have the same quantity. Right? So we're simultaneously one in quality, but we're different because the quantity is different. And we also have, since we're marginal potency, as was mentioned earlier, we can come under the influence of material nature when we misuse our free will. Or if we properly utilize our free will, then we become transcendental to the material nature. So that's what ends up all being discussed in that. Yeah. Good. Still writing. Good. Okay. Om Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. The Prabhupada ki jai, Bhakti-yoga Thakur ki jai, Tattva-sutra ki jai.